Welcome back for this second session of the morning. My name is Antoine Tesnière, and I will be happy to be your host for this session. So in our previous session, we explored the important topic of unlocking health data for global AI-ready systems. We heard from experts on the importance of data infrastructure, governance frameworks, international collaboration, and enabling the responsible and effective use of health data for AI development. Now we'll shift our focus to the immediate value that AI can bring to patients today. So in this roundtable, entitled AI and Diagnostic Treatment and Management of Patients and Medical Devices, we'll explore how AI, is revolutionizing healthcare by enhancing diagnostics, improving treatments, and transforming radically patient management. We have an amazing panel of experts that I would like to thank for taking the time to travel to Paris, some of them from far away, and exchange with us today, each with unique insights and perspective on this exciting field. So they'll share knowledge on how AI is being used to improve patient outcomes in real-world settings and in clinical contexts, and discuss the challenges and opportunities that lies ahead. I would like to start with you, Alexandre. Alexandre Loupy, who is the director of the Paris Institute of Transplantation and the Paris Transplant Group, to understand how have you integrated AI in your daily practice as a nephrologist?
Yeah, thank you, Antoine, and thank you for the kind invitation. And the backbone, I think, during this roundtable, from my perspective, is to share with you a concrete example of AI, from research to innovation to its deployment in clinical practice and for clinical trials. So I'm a nephrologist, and I take care here in Paris of transplant patients. So basically, the problem with transplant patients is to better allocate the organs and to take care of them. It's a very complex, multi-modal interaction with a lot of healthcare professionals. And the unmet needs in transplantation came with the fact that we needed tools to improve diagnosis, risk stratification, response to treatment, and fast-tracking drug development. So that's the unmet needs, and I think they are common to many medical fields. And so the unmet needs led us to the answers, and the concrete answers that I will be describing later on is we used very in-depth, highly structured, high-quality database from the Paris hospitals environment to build prognostication system using different algorithms to predict long-term allograft failure, response to treatment, and we use high-quality data to build these tools, which are now deployed in the setting of clinical trials for pharma to fast-track and digitalize and virtualize clinical trials. And the second deployment that I will be also describing later on is we use these as companion tools for healthcare professionals to improve patient care. Importantly, all this work has come from academic and from the France 2030 and all these AI initiatives to build these tools, which recently received the qualification from EMA and FDA.
Thank you. We'll see how scientific research is actually fueling AI development and startups and industry. We have the pleasure also to have another clinician, Piotr Szymański, who is the director of the European Society of Cardiology. Piotr, how is AI today impacting your field and cardiology in general?
Well, good morning. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. And indeed, I'm a practicing cardiologist, so I'm running a small imaging department, but I'm also seeing patients. Apart from that, and I'll give two perspectives. I'm also representing here the European Society of Cardiology, so a large group of practicing cardiologists in all 27 countries in EU and working on several digital projects. Well, from the cardiologist's perspective, there are not too many, at the moment, there are not too many AI-driven medical devices that we're using. They're mainly using imaging for image segmentation, so for the calculation of something which is called ejection fraction, so how the heart works. They're using to assess coronary flow and coronary flow reserve. So these are important indices. And they're, I would say, welcomed by the cardiology community with all the benefits and with all the risks of the implementation. But if you look from the bird's eye view, so from the view of the cardiology community as a whole, and from the perspective of the clinical practice guidelines, which is one of them, which are the documents that are driving clinical practice, both across Europe and across the world, in fact, there are very few implementations of artificial intelligence in those clinical practice guidelines at the moment. So we're at the very start of the development of the technology.
And we'll probably have time to see how we can move on to full implementation. Thank you. We're also very happy to have with us Jan Beger, who's the global head of AI advocacy at GE Healthcare. So, of course, AI is fully invading the medtech world. Jan, what role has AI been playing in the recent years in your development and in helping GE Healthcare to develop innovating medical devices?
To get started, thank you for having me today. I just want to start with adding to what Piotr said. We as an industry, we have developed AI solutions for quite some time, AI machine learning enabled medical devices, for instance. But what we really see in the marketplace, and we talked about this also during the break, is there's a huge delta between what's been cleared, approved, authorized by regulatory bodies versus what has been deployed in clinical settings in healthcare institutions across the globe. And I think there's quite some effort required now to kind of push the boundaries here and make sure that we foster the adoption of those technologies. And I was asked in the preparation of this panel to also share a little bit of real use cases and examples of AI in medical devices. So maybe I start with this little device, which maybe some of you know, ultrasound device, handheld, wireless, very powerful imaging modality, ultrasound. But we have one issue with this compared to modalities such as MRI or computed tomography, and this is that it's incredibly operator dependent. What do I mean by that? It means that I need to have a certain level of experience and education to get to high quality medical images, with this device, because it's extremely flexible to use. So this limits the power and capabilities of this fantastic imaging modality. So a fantastic use case for AI is to help with so-called scan guidance, And what we do here with this machine is, especially in cardiology cases as of today, we help the user during the scan and tell the user how to move the probe on the patient's body to get to high quality medical images, And this is just one example of, on one hand side, how we as an ecosystem can really work on high impact use cases that really focus on patient outcomes at the end.
Thank you. Divya Gupta, you're a Chief Business Officer from Qure.AI. So Qure.AI was actually born with the AI technology implemented in medical imaging and diagnostic. So how did you start using AI, and where do you stand now with the use of AI?
We started actually with a problem statement of health equity, and AI is a tool towards that. So for health equity, I think one of the things we very quickly realized is the level of diagnostic care that is available across the world is not uniform. And it doesn't matter whether you are in Africa or in the US, if you're not next to one of the better hospitals with the specialist, you don't get the care that others do, which is the gap we wanted to fill. So we started with an infectious disease called tuberculosis, which countries like France have come ahead of significantly in the last few decades, but actually is a massive issue still in Africa, Southeast Asia, India, and Latin America. It kills more people than HIV. And guess what? There is a fully autonomous AI for it, which WHO has endorsed. So I think that's a great example of clinical AI usage, working with policymakers to actually get not only the regulatory approval from EU MDR, FDA, etc., but also the policy for local adoption. From there, we've actually grown also to lung cancer, where we see a massive issue of early detection and hence patient survival, as well as stroke. So today, Qure actually is deployed in more than 90 countries in more than 3,000 sites. And I think the questions we are seeing around AI have significantly shifted from questions on integrations, questions on return on investment, but there are pockets of hope, which I think we shouldn't forget.
Thank you. And of course, from the clinical side to the industrial side, one of the crucial questions in the use of AI is how we can develop and regulate these new tools. And so we're also very lucky to have with us Luis Pinheiro, who's a senior epidemiology lead at the Data Analytics and Method Task Force at the European Medicine Agency, and specifically in charge of coordinating the Health Data Lab, and of course an expert on this topic. Maybe Luis, can you tell us how EMA is providing support to the development and evaluation of AI in the medicine's life cycle, and what would the EMA play as a role in this context?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here discussing AI. This has been something I've done very actively for the past 2 years. And one of the things that I think is critical when we discuss that is how do we plan for that, right? We acknowledge that there's an element of uncertainty. Uncertainty for medicines regulators, I think in general for regulators, is not something very helpful. So what we did about 1.5 years ago was to create a work plan. Now, the work plan was developed with certain assumptions, one of those that it needed to be updated every year or so, because the reality is that things change significantly. So for us, it was critical to put together a work plan, and we did it not just as EMA, the European Medicines Agency, but as a network. So many of you are in the medical health sector or healthcare sector, so you may know, but as a refresher, the European Medicines Regulatory Network is the combination of the EMA, the national competent authorities, and the Commission. So it's actually a sort of a wider body, if you like. And this work plan was developed in combination with all this network. And we focused into 4 big topics, which we feel generally are the topics that we're required to address. And the first one was guidance, policy, and product support. So essentially, how do we regulate medicines in terms of the application of AI in the medicine's life cycle? And also looking at policy for ourselves. So we need to remember that the EMA is not only medicines regulator, but is also regulated by the AI Act. So we have, for the uses of AI that we also need to digest the AI Act and supplementary regulations or the legal ecosystem around it. The other aspect was tools and technology. So build the tools and technologies and make it available and collaborate across the network to ensure that we can use these tools in an effective way and we don't actually duplicate effort. Then the other aspect was the collaboration and change management. This is critical as well. That goes into stakeholder engagement, and that involves academia, researchers, patients, healthcare professionals, industry, other regulatory authorities across the world. So a lot of activities around that space. But critically, and you probably hear me say this quite a few times, AI literacy. Now, my career started in academia, so I'm by default a literacy man, and I think literacy is critical. The Act also implemented that recently in the past 2 weeks ago. That element came into play. But for us, we've been planning for that for the past 2 years. And finally, there's another element that we added, which was experimentation. And that is to sustain an innovation framework. And I think that is critical, both from our use of AI as well as from the industry use, for us to understand, is this feasible, does this make sense, and then explain that to our assessors and sort of move that into the medicines regulation space. On top of that, I'm not going to go into detail, but we've also published recently an AI reflection paper, September last year, where we see lots of topics being raised, including on medical devices used in clinical trials. As you know, EMA has some limited role in medical devices. But in that respect, on the use in clinical trials, obviously there's an interest. How do you collect information? I think we're having a separate talk, Piotr and myself, around that, that quality of data that comes in through that, and we reflect on that. So there's quite a lot of activities around this space for us to engage with stakeholders and enable safe and responsible use of AI in the medicine's life cycle for the benefit of human and animal health.
Thank you, and we should mention, but of course you're all aware that Europe has been the first place to set up frameworks for development of AI with the AI Act. That's of course overlooked by other countries, but we'll get back to it. Maybe we should go more in depth on these questions. Alexandre, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you have been establishing the first AI-driven approach that's been FDA approved in the US with your activities. Can you share some concrete example of how you use AI in these approaches and how it improves personalized treatment and patient management?
Yeah, sure, of course. So the first thing that I want to illustrate, and it's like 20 minutes of summary of 10 years of my life, is what I will be describing on the use of AI for transplant patient care has gone through an entire process from the generation of model, curation, publication, engagement with stakeholders, and then my life became a nightmare because we had to qualify it with EMA and FDA. But that's a nightmare for the good because you are challenged by these health authorities, and I think that's very important. So we were challenged for almost 5 years for all the context of use of our AI tool. Is it reliable? Is it generalizable? Is it transportable to different healthcare systems? Is it validated in African American, in Hispanic? Is it validated in living deceased donor, etc., etc.? So that was a long roadmap. And the most recent applications were the qualification by FDA. So qualification is not FDA approval. Qualification means that you can use this predictive AI tool that predicts 10 years risk of rejection, allograft loss, and patient death. And if you're pharma industry, 1 year after transplantation and randomization, you can virtualize the clinical trials at 10 years, and the FDA will give you a conditional approval of the drug many years ahead. So that's a clear context of use with pharma of this multimodal predictive AI-based tool, which has been qualified by the FDA and qualified also with EMA. The second context of use, and I think that's a very tricky one, is how these tools, these predictive tools, can help the decision-making process for clinicians. And again, I echo what you said, we're not talking about imaging, right? We are talking about a system that helps for patient care. And we have seen many failures of AI in that setting. In oncology, we have seen failures. The EPIC-based sepsis prediction system, AI-based, was a failure also that produced wrong recommendations. So now with these tools, we are trying to deploy that into clinical practice through a startup. And we are running a randomized control trial to compare if the physician helped by the AI tool for the predictions can take better decisions that would lead ultimately to better patient outcome, better quality of life, and savings for the healthcare system. So that's the second context of use that requires this large randomized trial in 13 centers in six countries in Europe. We have closed it, and the primary results, the primary endpoints are positive. So it was very important for us to have this body of proof that actually the AI tool was not only performing well, but also helpful for patients in the context of managing transplant patients.
And so what are the expected outcomes for the patients in your studies, or some of them that you can share, because you have a number of scientific publications so far based on your algorithm?
Yes, so basically what the algorithm tells you for a single patient is on two grounds. The first is when you decide to allocate a certain graft to a certain patient, so many parameters you have to take into account, including the fact that when you're on call, you can, be sleep deprived, or you can take wrong recommendations. So you take benefit of the memory of the system, and the system will project you a utility-futility indexed by the decision that you're about to take for a patient to take an organ or not to take an organ. That's the first point. The second point that the software helps, the algorithm will project any time after transplant the likelihood that the patient has to have cancer, major adverse cardiovascular events, rejection, graft loss, and mortality. And so now this is deployed and embedded in a software which is CE mark under the new regulation. And we measure how the use of that system on a daily basis of clinical practice is reducing the number of hospitalizations, is improving the diagnosis of rejection, is reducing the need for invasive procedures like biopsies, and ultimately translate to better patient outcome. And for now, the results of the study are very positive for these primary and secondary endpoints, which I think in the field of managing is pretty new, because we are still lacking studies like that in all specialties.
Thank you. So, of course, when you combine grafting and AI, there should be a number of ethical aspects that you need to tackle. What would you say are the main ones that you've been envisioning, and how you solve them?
Okay, yeah, you're absolutely right. So when we constructed the system, of course, we had to go through ethical approval from the EU and from France in all these trials, very compliant, GDPR, and etc. The hurdles are on many grounds. The first hurdle, I would say, in terms of ethics, is I think the ethics regarding the way we build the algorithm. Transparency, validation, again, generalizability. So that was very necessary when we ran this trial, to have the trust that this algorithm was not built like in 2 days and just could be harmful for the patients. But we had to prove to the regulators that we actually had the sufficient level of confidence that it will improve the decision-making process. So that's the first part. The second part with ethics is also the fact that you are empowering a physician with a tool that will ultimately lead to change patient care. And that's very important when you give predictions to a physician, how these predictions are given to the patients, how he packaged that. So one of the things that we framed in the iBox initiative was really to be a co-pilot and a companion tool that provides, not directly recommendations, but that will provide you in a dashboard, so some type of risks, but only the physician will take this information to change his decision-making process. So it's not AI, and also in the protocols, we allow the AI to be overridden by the physicians, just as a pilot in a flight can override the autopilot. So that's how we ethically framed it, and of course there are many other ethical questions with AI, but I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you. So, Luis, we mentioned the impact of AI-fueled solutions. From your standpoint, do you already see a number of real-world evidence where AI can improve patient care, clinical decision, diagnostic, or other aspects?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think when we talk about improving clinical decision-making, or sort of healthcare in general, we probably should split in sort of 3 big buckets. Certainly at the point of care, which is what patients want, but also in the perspective of the developer and in the perspective of the regulator, right? So from a perspective of point of care, of treatment, I think a lot has been pointed out, and I think one of the things that we see, certainly not something we see often in the EMA, but things that we can pick up is on the computer imaging side. The deep learning models tend to perform quite well with imaging. It transforms the image into numbers, and numbers are things that machines love to do. So we hear a lot about the sort of radiology aspects of this. What we see there as well in the publications that come through is that it's not just the model itself that's making the difference, but actually the parity between the model and the person and the radiologist. So getting that partnership right is important. So we see we see encouraging information coming out, particularly from that side. From the industry side, we know that there are initial embryonic steps to using artificial intelligence. We've heard in the opening session that actually they're looking at things like drug discovery, which is not particularly new. Machine learning or equivalents of that have been used in drug discovery for a while, but also in the aspect of manufacturing, pharmacovigilance. Pharmacovigilance is sort of one of my backgrounds and a very ripe place to do to apply for artificial intelligence, because there you're not trying to fully replace a human. That's not the achievement you're trying to do. You're mostly trying to structure information, gather information in an easy to understand way, and to clear out things that are poor quality. So these are really basic stuff, but if you do it at scale, it has an impact, and it has an impact in the sense that we can detect safety signals faster, we can intervene into those safety signals and have an impact as regulators faster, not just as industry, but as regulators as well, because we also do pharmacovigilance, and moving into the regulatory space, again, pharmacovigilance is a critical area, but also in terms of structuring information, and we have things like Scientific Explorer that tries to do that. And we have about 4 other sort of specific use cases that we're in the final steps of testing. A lot of this is about testing, and you almost end up in iterations of testing, but certainly see a lot of positive initiatives coming out of both the care, point of care, the industry, and the regulatory space. Thanks.
Right. And so I guess you see an increasing amount of data coming into your evaluation and from the clinicians or these players?
Yeah. So the data is just going to increase, and the way you handle that is by traceability, by mapping it, by cataloging it, by understanding it, by sort of working with that sophistication and the level of elaborate nature of the data. So for instance, one of the things that the agency has done, in the European Medicines Agency has done in that space, is we've built a catalog of data, real-world data, so you can go to the EMA website and you can have access to the catalog of data. And that will give you a multidimensional representation of that data, not just what it is, where it was collected, and additional metadata on that, but also what studies have used that, which can help you understand fitness for purpose of studies. And then attached to that, you have a catalog of studies that also maps down to the data. And on top of that, as you know, you're very active in the European health data space, and we welcome it quite a lot. Darwin EU, which has been an initiative from the EMA, is something that can be seen as sort of proof of concept of the HDS. It is a federated network, and having expanded federated network can help inform decision-making at the agency better. Thanks.
Thank you. Piotr, from your perspective, what are the main fields in your activity that are likely to be fully changed or improved, especially specifically in patient management, from your view?
Well, could I have this transducer, please? Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect example of what could be improved. So what it offers, actually, it offers the capture of images in the way that is automated. So this is, of course, clearly the way to improve cardiology in many ways, but it also raises a lot of questions. Who should use that? And if so, how should we, as teachers, medical teachers, educate the users, the end users? Should it be used for screening, for instance, by primary care physicians or technicians? But if so, it captures only predefined planes. So what about something which is called incidentalomas, so incidental findings? Who should interpret them? And then who should supervise the vast amount of data that will come from the semi-automated capture of images? Should it be cardiologists? So these are the questions that we're ahead of. It's about the workflows, it's about the education, it's about the literacy. And we're gradually trying to sort it out. To your question, there are few areas in which they're clearly sorted out. It's electrocardiogram, EKG monitoring, in which artificial intelligence is helpful, and we're dealing with a large amount of data, though the flood of data is still coming from the remote monitoring devices. And this is image segmentation, for which, for certain specific cardiology parameters, we're happy to manage that, and this is already fully implemented, so up and running. Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing that. I'll give it back to you.
Many chances for improvement, but we'll discuss this. So you mentioned a number of challenges. Of course, training is one. We'll probably get back to that. But how do you analyze, I would say, the unmet needs or the AI application activities or places that you are targeting first in your activity?
I guess I have to use Ronald Rumsfeld, unknown unknowns. So for artificial intelligence, there are many more unknown unknowns in terms of the unmet medical needs that we could identify. We're in the continuous process of looking at the newly developing technologies, but at this stage, it's both unclear how to define outcome measures, so how to assess the technologies, what are the reasonable outcomes. It's unclear which methodology apply to assess the clinical benefit for the ever-evolving technologies and for the ever-changing environment in which they're used. But certainly, I would say that since we're living now in the era of digital biomarkers, so there's dozens and dozens, or perhaps hundreds and hundreds and thousands of digital biomarkers that we're now facing. So there is an urgent need, and that's an unmet need for their interpretation, learning of their clinical usability, and then their practical application. So I think that this is one of the unmet needs in this particular area. But of course, many others to be mentioned.
Thank you. So Jan, getting back to you and the probes, can you tell us how you and the GE Healthcare team work in leveraging AI to improve medical devices? What is the process of development? What are the questions you're trying to target? And probably also what are the dialogues that you establish between the clinicians to get the full use of your AI-powered devices?
Thank you very much. I think the very first thing we try to do as industry players, and you had a fantastic example with Qure.AI, is we want to focus on high-impact use cases, right? And when I think about the last couple of years of machine learning AI development in healthcare, right, radiology has been really at the forefront, not just in terms of innovation, but also adoption of AI-enabled technologies. Maybe due to the reason that this is computer vision and this is something relatively simple to do, okay? But I think there is much more potential going forward in also non-imaging use cases and multimodal use cases. Hopefully we can talk about this a little bit later as well. So first of all, the focus, of course, is identify, and this is not a trivial question, is what are those high impact use cases? Where should you, right, invest effort and time and money into to make an impact? The second thing is, right, and this has been discussed in length as well in the previous panel, is where do we get the data from? Yeah? Where do we get this high quality, diverse data we require to build our AI models? And then very important, of course, beside those two components, is how do we collaborate across the healthcare ecosystem to turn just an idea, right, a kind of an approach into something that really makes an impact in day-to-day healthcare. And here it's very important to collaborate with all stakeholders, clinicians and healthcare professionals first, really at day one optimally, to help us decide, hey, are we working on the right problems? Are we tackling the right use case? And this is, I mean, at least in our processes, something where we work with academic institutions and healthcare institutions across the globe to collaborate in those areas.
Right. Alexandre mentioned also the number of evaluation and regulatory landscape that you have to go through. How do you, as an industrial, handle this? What's your vision on this, and how you tackle these questions?
Maybe two things first, and I believe everyone in the room agrees. Healthcare is a highly regulated industry for a reason, right? I mean, first and foremost, we don't want to harm patients. Yeah, and all technologies we implement into healthcare, be it AI or something else, we need to make sure they are tested, validated, right, and turn to like a positive outcome at the end. That's number one. The second thing is, I hope you all agree that there is massive potential, transformative potential in AI, generative AI, foundation models, in those kind of technologies to really make a difference in healthcare, to actually even turn healthcare into a completely different approach than how we operate it today. Yeah. So what is really required is an ecosystem approach to collaborate across all different stakeholders to get to this kind of potential future. Yeah. And when I think about GE Healthcare and how we have collaborated with regulatory bodies around the globe, I have to say that from my perspective, it's very important to have really a constructive cooperation, a constructive dialogue. Yeah? This is such a fast evolving space in artificial intelligence. Everyone has to learn from each other. And I think we need to have work groups, like meetings like this as well, right? To get together, discuss the potential, discuss the challenges, and actually get on the same table. I think this is something very important. And kind of this approach, I mean, has helped us. For instance, right, I mentioned this number with the US FDA, more than 1,000 authorized AI machine learning enabled medical devices. And we are one of the leaders in that space with the most clearances. So I think it's very important to collaborate with regulatory bodies, work early with healthcare institutions and clinicians, right? Identify the right use cases, find a good way to tackle this problem of data. Maybe we can even talk about synthetic data a little bit as well. So just a variety of different things. But I think the most important thing really is that we have this North Star of changing healthcare, right, all together for the better. And we just, as it has been said earlier, I think, Eric, it was you. It cannot be done by a single institution or entity, right? We have to do this together as an ecosystem.
Thank you. Divya at Qure.AI, what would you say are the most impactful improvement in your solutions? Is it efficacy, safety, quality? And how you address these questions in developing AI-powered approaches?
I think efficacy is the most, is the biggest benefit that we bring to a health system. When I say efficacy, it is always in context of what the status quo is. So I'll take two examples, one of a developed country and one of a low and middle income country. Let's take the example of United Kingdom. Access to healthcare exists, well-trained physicians in the NHS, but the capacity that exists means that if you have a scan, it can take 7 or 12 weeks by the time you get your report. And from then, you will actually be sent to your referring physician. And if, God forbid, there were signs of lung cancer, you've probably changed stage by then. And the physicians here know that stage 1 and 2 of lung cancer, you can actually survive with the right medication for 10 years and beyond. But stage 3 and 4, it's almost sure death. So in that context, what Qure, and of course others, so it's not only us, what AI is doing is helping you triage from the thousands of scans done, which ones are the ones which are most at risk. Is there a possibility that there is one which will not get prioritized? Is that an error? Yes, I cannot stand here and say that no AI does no error. But guess what? Humans make errors too. So I think the question of efficacy is, what is the baseline? So if with AI, you're able to go from 7 to 12 weeks to 1 day, that is efficacy in my view. So that's one. Now let's take a very contrasting example in Kenya, which has a very large GE install base of scanners, X-ray, CT scanners, etc. they have this tool, they have this machine existing in their primary healthcare facilities, but they just don't have, forget about radiologists, trained physicians to be able to read the scan. So if a patient comes, gets a scan, and one day later someone realizes the scan was done wrong because it was not oriented correctly, the patient has gone by then. For that patient, every day is livelihood dependent. They're not going to come back again because they will not make their daily wage. So if you get instant feedback that, no, the scan was not right, do it again, which a trained technologist can do. But again, the context, does the trained technologist exist in that particular region setting? And this is, again, I will say this is not a problem of only developing countries. This problem exists across the world of quality. And of course, if you can tell the physicians there or the referring physician or the radiologist, hey, there are signs of TB or there are signs of lung cancer or whatever that might be, you've actually cut down the time to diagnosis for the patient such that the treatment can start earlier. Either it improves their life or it improves the ability for them to get on with their life. Either way, they're not in dilemma for long. That is why I would say efficacy is what we focus on.
Thank you. And of course, you need to go through the same regulatory landscape. How do you navigate this when developing AI solutions and algorithm?
I think that is par for the course in healthcare, and for right reasons. I actually am of the opinion that regulatory burdens, if you will, or the processes that it makes, that we have to, the hoops that we have to jump through, force us to think whether we have the use case right. If we didn't have that, we would, innovate willy-nilly, right? Because there is a significant amount of time and money that a company has to spend on making sure that you get the right clearances, you actually have to spend a lot more time upfront with physicians, with people who are going to use it to prioritize. So we have been very successful with both the EU MDR, the new regulatory framework, as well as with the FDA, and found that if you approach the FDA with right level of data, they are actually quite open to giving suggestions. So we've I should knock on wood. We've had actually a very positive experience when it comes to the regulatory authorities. But it doesn't stop at regulatory, because when it comes to AI, there is also legal repercussions on who is taking the legal risk, right? And that is, I think, less defined. In healthcare, I think the regulatory part, at least it is defined, right? At least you know what the problem is and how you can go about it. The legal part is less so.
Thank you. Getting back to you, Luis. So can you tell us how the EMA is working to ensure the safety and the efficacy of these new tools, and specifically in the context of diagnostic and treatments?
Yeah, sure. That's another great question. The key thing to know about the EMA is that we're not new to innovation. It's not something that's particularly new. What's new here is the AI, it's technology. But there are already a number of bodies or fora in the agency that are looking at innovation and have been doing so for potentially the past decade. So I have something called the Innovation Task Force, which some of you may know. We have the business, it used to be called Business and Pipeline Meetings. Now they're called Portfolio and Technology Meetings. We also like to change the names every so often. But that exists, and we have the Scientific Advice Working Party, where we are also very kind, and we also welcome not just the FDA, we're also very welcoming, and we can have ITF meetings, so Innovation Task Force meetings, prior to a Scientific Advice Working Party, Scientific Advice Application or Qualification Procedure, where we can provide some informal advice. So these would be in the ITFs and the portfolio technology meetings. And then it goes on to proper scientific advice and qualifications if that's needed. Now, the novelty here was not that these four exist. They've existed for quite a while. Obviously, we see very unique medicines coming out through these pipelines. But the novelty here is that there was the creation recently of a methodology working party. That methodology working party that has specific scope on artificial intelligence has created a specialized community of many different things, but one of which was artificial intelligence. So now we have this thing called the Special Interest Area on Artificial Intelligence and Data Science. And one of the responsibilities of this group is to support, in addition to what exists, these four that exist, to support scientific advice and qualification procedures and meetings with industry in general. So this is there. This has been created, and this is there. We have roughly about 50 European-wide experts involved in this special interest area, and I am one of the co-leads. I'm part of the leadership team of that group. So that is one way of getting more input, more technical input into innovation processes that already exist. So we're just strengthening things. On top of that, there is a whole work on guidance development. You need to understand what guidance we need to develop, what sort of sequencing we need. If we need if we need a Q&A, question and answers document, if we need something a little bit more robust, and be able to use that lot of different regulatory solutions that we have at hand from a medicines regulator perspective to help developers through the process, but also to ensure that we're keeping our eye on the main goal of DMA, which is to ensure safe and responsible use of AI for the benefit of animal and human health.
And so what would you say are the key and specific regulatory challenges specific to AI? When looking at that kind of innovation, you mentioned that you had long-standing experience of innovation, of course, but what are the specific aspects that you are overlooking at AI, for example?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue I think we all have is just speed of development. The novelty is just so fast. We're just seeing so many things, and things change potentially on a day. Things change tremendously. We were in the middle of developing our AI reflection paper when sort of the big sort of explosion of large language model came out in, I think, November 2022, and we had to quickly react to that. So it's novelty is the issue, and we need to understand how much uncertainty we can take on that, right? Because we won't be able to know everything. We're not developing some of these documents. There's discussions on what is explainability in the large language models generative AI setting, and do we need it? Because at some point we're just looking at discriminative AI, looking at explainability in that respect, and thought, okay, well, we need explainability in that respect. But now with large language models, well, do you need it? And is it the aim to be accurate, or is it just to mimic? So there's all this element with novelty that we need to address. And we address it by creating this work plan. And the work plan sort of tries to bring in the element of an observatory that can help us understand what's coming in, but give us sort of a structured view of that, because it's very easy to get lost in the details. So it tries to give us a structured view on that and try to build smart regulation. Well, when I mean smart regulation, I mean from a medicines regulation perspective. There may be some terminology that I use that is similar to the Commission, but I mean it from a medicines perspective. So I think hopefully that's clear. Another thing is the new pharma law. The new pharma law is potentially providing us with additional mechanisms to navigate innovation through new, let's say, 4 new approaches to engaging with innovation. So there's opportunities there, but big challenges. Novelty is key. Novelty requires wise approaches to regulation and medicines regulation, and it requires literacy. So I'm banging on literacy again. It requires us to consistently keep our assessors up to date. Thanks.
Thank you, and I understand that the dialogue that you have with innovators actually nurtures your experience or your expertise, I should say, in evaluating these new approaches. Let's look maybe on the specific challenges that you are facing in the development of your solutions, either from the clinical or industrial sides. Alexandre, Jan, and Divya, maybe what are the key challenges that you see when trying to integrate AI tools, AI solutions into healthcare workflows and ensuring that they're seamlessly adopted by healthcare professionals, which is one key to the full potential that we can develop with AI. Alexandre, you want to start?
Adoption by healthcare professionals is, of course, very important. And to illustrate the roadmap of adoption of the iBox system for transplantation, again, with the concrete example and what we've been through, I would say 3 pillars. The first is scientific validity. You know, a lot of AI stuff that are published, like in open access journals or whatever. So I think scientific validity and the fact that we were able to publish this iBox stuff in BMG, New England, Lancet, Nature, all these suite, I mean, brings consistency. Scientific validity is a key. The second point, which I think is one of the most trickiest one, is proof of clinical utility. And when we build this system for prediction, the first reaction we had from my colleagues is that, I mean, how dare an algorithm will give me some advices to cure patients based on an AI tool. I know which patient needs what care. I know when to do a biopsy. I know when to change my immunosuppressive regimens. So we had some pushback from colleagues, and we had to design a study not only to prove clinical utility, but also we blinded assess physicians to make recommendations, giving them all the parameters you will dream of, and we compared that with the AI system. And the answer, and we published that was not easy to publish. The answer for managing kidney transplantation was, to make a long story short, a lot of inter-observer variability, performances and discrimination was awful, calibration was bad, and the full professors did not do any better than associate professors, which, you know, as being a professor, I'm like, okay, well, this experience is not teaching me a lot. So, and that was, I think, an argument for adoption, to make healthcare professionals know that the fact that on every single daily basis, when you are facing complex patients like transplant patients, the decision that you make encompasses a lot of time re-stratification, and the fact that the system can help you is very important. Then for clinical utility, you have to design, again, really well-packaged randomized trial to show that the physician with AI is outperforming the physician alone. And in imaging, I think it's, as said, it's pretty obvious. For managing, again, complex disease, you don't find a lot of things. And the last pillar that I want to illustrate is that you can do research, you can do innovation. If you don't do public-private partnership to transform your innovation into a product that can go through all these steps to EMA, MDR, EU marking, and of course to deploy the software on an every daily single basis to make it a software that can be plugged into electronic health record that will allow physicians not to waste time by entering data. All these components are important because you can have a good algorithm that can be beneficial to patients. If it's not user-friendly, if it has not gone through all the regulatory process, no one is going to use it. And just to end up with that, because it's very important, you need to have also a market, right? Because a private company will not sustain a software that does not find a market, right? Because that costs a lot of money to deploy and to build. And in France, there has been a lot on telemonitoring and reimbursement, and our project now is deployed in more than 10,000 patients in France, but under the umbrella of telemonitoring. And what we offer is way more than a telemonitoring, right? It's a system which is intelligently telling physicians how to treat patients. And that does not qualify from today to any reimbursement in France, which is a little bit problematic, but I guess that we're going to make it change. So yeah, that was my adoption.
Now, reflecting on your clinician's point of view, it's really interesting to understand that the performance of algorithm was specifically viewed on the technical side from the beginning, especially when you compare radiology performance with AI versus radiology reading by humans. And then a number of studies came up showing that not only you can get the level of performance with the clinicians with AI tools in clinical decision making, but also something that everyone viewed as the sole aspect of humans when discussing with patients, and there was this really interesting study on empathy. So you finally see that actually every step of clinical relationship, clinical management can be improved with the AI algorithm. Divya, how do you tackle these questions and these? What are the main challenges that you try to address when willing to establish, not only efficacy or security, but also adoption by healthcare providers?
I actually fully agree with what you said. I mean, till the point of efficacy, it is actually very controllable. You know what you have to do. It is defined. There are objectives, and you do it. It takes time. It takes a lot of investment, but at least the path is clear, what you have to do. After that is where I think it's the wild forest, because every system is different, every hospital is different, every country is different. We've had clients, even though radiology actually is one of the few streams where thanks to DICOM, there is standardization. But even then, getting integrated in a healthcare system comes with significant amount of challenges when it comes to working with, whether there are other PACS vendors, whether it's the IT department. I think it boils down to incentives. They have their day job, they have what they want to do. Why should they bother to integrate one AI solution which will impact one department in the hospital? We've had a client who has been waiting for a lung cancer solution for, I think, close to 5 to 6 months. And at that point, finally, we said, look, you have to ask for it to the PACS company, because they don't gain from it, the PACS company, right? So finally, it did happen. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. So I think that it comes down to incentives, that what we think that everything works because of patient benefit, but in reality, there are a lot more hoops. So one, within the hospital, there are so many departments who have to integrate it, spend time on it, don't necessarily see the benefit from it directly in their day-to-day lives. But the same thing on the financial side. I think to exactly what you said, the reimbursement landscape is much harder to navigate, because it is unclear what you have to do to get into the reimbursement system. And yes, at a high level, it's clear if you show economic benefit to either the country or the hospital, there is reimbursement. But in reality, it doesn't. It needs a lot more. It's a lot more complex. In the US, for example, they have certain steps of what it takes to get to reimbursement. There are breakthrough device recognitions. And there are good examples of AI companies who have got reimbursement for 2 years, and then the insurance companies have decided they don't want to negotiate it. So now you have proven that there is patient benefit, you have proven that there is economic benefit, but you still have to negotiate with the insurance that it actually gets a price. So from that, what I'm trying to say is that this part of incentives on whether it is for the insurance, whether it is for the hospital administrator, whether it is for a country, like in the public health setting, that is the part which is much harder to navigate because it is not uniform.
Right. And Jon, from your side, would you say that your long-standing expertise in medtech history is an asset in designing AI tools that are actually easy adapted by patients, or is it a completely new world?
So I think we have to differentiate a little bit, right? I think what you primarily talked about are like decision support kind of tools, but AI is used and deployed, for instance, in radiology in many more aspects, right? So just to give you an example, deep learning is used to reduce scan times of cardiac MRIs quite drastically, right? By like close to 50%, right? When you think about a cardiac patient, right, they are usually really sick. They have to get into this machine, which is not a pleasant experience for like a fit normal person, but for a cardiac person, it's really pretty hard. They also have to hold breath multiple times during such a scan. And if we can just reduce scan time leveraging deep learning, and even eventually reduce the need for multiple breath holds, but keep the same image quality at the same time, right? This is also quite an improvement to patient experience. Just as an example, just want to point out AI is not just decision support, it's used in many more different, let's say, applications across the board. But look, I agree to what you all said, maybe a few more things from my side. One thing I think is a continuous challenge since we actually started the digital transformation of the healthcare industry is, and it has been mentioned in the previous panel as well, is interoperability, right? And data management actually, right? We have which seems to be like a really, really difficult problem. I think a lot of hospitals today, I'm not just talking about the like top tier academic centers, but like the mid-sized type of hospitals, they need to start managing their data properly, right? If we want to be ready for a future of AI, we have to manage our data differently. We have to ensure we are ready for like interoperable systems like in the long run. The second thing I wanted to point out where I believe we as an industry, right, or ecosystem even have to do more is showing like broader return of investment. You talked about this to some extent. And then I want to go back to what Luis earlier said, because I think this is also a point to the overall adoption of AI. AI is not just about technology, yeah? Especially in healthcare, it's a lot about trust. Yeah? And we need to find ways so that healthcare professionals start trusting those technologies. Yeah? And one thing to this is, I think, and this is why I mentioned you, Luis, is we have to work on this overall field of AI literacy. Yeah? And I think education is a big part of this, really. So educating healthcare professionals on the basics of AI is something very important. I'm not saying we need to turn them to like data scientists or AI experts, not at all. But they need to have the right level of understanding and knowledge to use this technology responsibly. Yeah? And maybe two more things, if I may, very quickly. When we talk about like long-term adoption and successful adoption, there are a couple of more things which I've not heard in this conversation yet and also not in the previous conversation, but I think it's something very important to discuss and think through over the next couple of years are two things. One is, as of today, we are not leveraging the real power of deep learning, which is it's getting better over time the more we use it. We don't do this in healthcare at all today. Yeah? So something what is called continuous learning is something we have to get into at some point, right? And find ways to deal with this also from a regulatory standpoint. And secondly, maybe one, let's say, partial solution to this is we also need to discuss and think more about the entire life cycle of AI, yeah? Which is part of adoption as well. We need to think about how can we monitor AI solutions post-deployment, post-market, so that we make sure we don't see like model drift, data drift, those kind of things. And if we show this, right, we will further foster adoption of those technologies.
Thank you. So, Piotr, what are your view on these challenges in ensuring accuracy, reliability, and trust in AI algorithm developments from the clinicians that you work with?
Well, if you allow me, I'd like to start from a more general remark, looking at the history of medicine. Well, first of all, we're in the digital revolution for less than a generation. This is not a sufficient amount of time to test any medical technology. Imagine that this is an average quarter of a lifetime of a human being. It's less than 20 years that we're interconnected. So we will certainly deal for the next 30, 40, or 50 years with a lot of uncertainties as we were dealing with drug development. It took 3, 4, 5 decades to start developing the drugs in an orderly manner. So this is going to be exactly the same with digital technology. So that's my first remark. Less than one generation life cycle we're in the digital community, both in terms of data collection and data analysis. And this is a quarter of the human life cycle. So we're far from understanding anything. The applications that we can verify are those that can apply to, let's say, short-term goals, such as improving the time of scanning. That's a very good example, but certainly not the public impact. In terms of the challenges in verification, given that we're having this kind of a very short horizon that we can afford to look both backwards and forward, we clearly have to focus on those shorter-term goals. So improving the efficacy of medical devices, improving the efficacy of diagnostic algorithms, and the quality of data. In that respect, and then we have to reiterate literacy, but not just in understanding the AI, but also in understanding how important the data collection by, let's say, field physicians, field healthcare providers is, in order to ensure that in future, for the next generation, we're going to derive full benefit from artificial intelligence. But we're still looking at it like from a very short perspective, so a lot of uncertainties.
Thank you. Luis, how do you deal with this acceleration of innovation? And AI, I think, is a good symbol of it in terms of regulation on one side. And second aspect, because everyone here mentioned trust, is regulation the answer to create trust?
Oh, that's a challenging question.
And you have 2 hours.
Yes, that is almost a philosophical question. Maybe I'll speak in my own personal capacity there as the coordinator for the Health Data Lab, where we actually develop solutions for ourselves. And it's not enough. You need a little bit more than that. Engagement is usually part of that. You need the validation element of it. Most of the transparency elements will be applicable under the AI Act already. So there's, I would say that sort of creates the, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use a word that FDA is using currently, but in no way is that something that we're sure to be using in EMA and the network, but to establish a level of credibility, right? So that element is critical, but I think there's an element of the user interface, because we quite often talk about the model and the model this and the model that and whatever, and then it's really up to the user to make a difference or not. And as I pointed out at the beginning of the discussion, the nice publication in Nature last year, November 2024, pointing out that there is really no good predictor for how radiologists pair up with AI systems. People were thinking, oh, maybe it's about expertise. Maybe those that have lower expertise are going to benefit the most, or maybe it's about digital literacy in general, or maybe and everything was sort of off, and it was really whether the first few times the user was using the model, did it fail? Right, so how do you manage that? I mean, again, go back to literacy. So trust has an element of literacy into it, I think. And Jan, you were pointing to that as far as I understood your comments. There's an element of literacy which is critical. If you look at our work plan, we even call it change management. Because that's it, how do you go through the process of creating awareness, looking for interest from people, just generating that interest of having that change. In faculty, when I was doing my master's in epidemiology, one of my teachers said, nobody likes change except a baby with a dirty nappy. And you need to manage that change, and that brings it up to trust. So trust from the user. From a regulatory perspective, there's the Act, and there's going to be additional sort of medicine-specific regulation or guidance, rather. And in that respect, that will be our threshold for the application of AI in the medical device. But then trust, as we're discussing here, to me means user trust, the patient trust, and that requires other elements to come into the loop. The regulator is part of that equation, but is not the only element in that equation. Thanks.
Thank you for taking the challenge. Piotr, sorry.
Could I just give you an example that we do really trust in AI? And I'll use the example not from medicine, but actually from the Paris French Open. The tennis ball leaves the trace on the clay, so you needn't have any artificial intelligence to check whether it's out or not, so no line calls are fairly easy. Yet, we are using artificial intelligence. We have no line umpires at the French Open at the moment, and there's no issue over trustworthy AI, but the condition to that is that the intended use is very well defined and the accuracy is very well defined. So even in the situation such as this, where individual careers and huge money is at stake, if the technologies were defined and if its use is well defined, it will be applied in medicine as it is applied now in sports and in other applications. So I don't personally believe it's a matter of trust. It's a matter of a good definition of how it should be used and the verification of its accuracy, and that's it.
Thank you. We still have a few more minutes to go. Maybe to try and give a broader view on our discussions, I would ask all of you to come up with two aspects. One is, what are the future trends or the future steps that you see in your own development in the next month, and what collective action we should take to make these steps a reality and an improvement for the patients. Divya, you want to start?
Look, I think the next 2 months, you said, are very practical. Just because it's 2 months. I think we are, as a company, are at a stage, and I think also for the industry, where we have to go and prove large-scale adoption. And while we see it in certain use cases, to get to large, and why is large-scale adoption important? So that there is viability. Like you said, if it is not financially viable, at some point, innovation will not thrive. And that is the focus for us in the next few months. Specifically, we are really trying to showcase and demonstrate that there is return on investment. The audience changes, right? For lung cancer, the return on investment is at a hospital level and at a patient level, because the insurance company is looking at it at a patient level. A hospital is looking at it from a, does the hospital generate enough return on investment? So that's what we are really focusing on, since we think it will change and impact policy. In the section of tuberculosis, we are trying to demonstrate through ministries of health that in this environment of challenging aid and fund, it is the opportunity to think about AI and digital at a government level, because we can significantly reduce spend. So that's what our next 2 months look like.
Thank you. Alexandre? Besides going back to the US?
I think the natural evolution is to embed a solution which will be a dashboard for physicians that has the different algorithm that responds to different contexts of use. So in the global iBox, we have virtual biopsy systems, automation of diagnosis that can reclassify diseases. And so, the global landscape will be to have this dashboard, and you can use the different components of AI in this dashboard depending on the context of use and the patients that you are dealing with. And I would like just to end with something that I would like to put a lot of stress on, is if sometimes regulators can be slow, I think patients are fast. When you convince patients that they have their benefit, and with the virtual biopsy system that we have built, we have a study that shows patients, we just call them and say, no, based on this algorithm, your likelihood to have this biopsy to show anything clinically actionable is 0. So we were able to cancel 65% of hospitalization and biopsy. Guess what? We have a new ongoing clinical trials. The patients that have tasted this AI tool, they do not want to be included because they don't want to be in the standard of care arm. And I think that's one of the best answers, and that's why we are now building these things with patients. And in Global Initiative, we try to empower patient and patient advocates because they can go and have some pressure on the regulators to say, okay, we are transplant patients and we need to have access to this technology. So I think that's also a point which is very important to mention.
Thank you. Piotr?
Well, for 2 months, it's extremely difficult to say.
It can be 6.
Well, in 6 months or in the incoming year, from the European Society of Cardiology perspective, we'll certainly focus on artificial intelligence literacy and educating physicians. That's one. The second is, of course, developing the concepts on the levels of evidence on the use of artificial intelligence in clinical practice guidelines. And the third one is also collaborating with regulators on the levels of evidence and the assessment of medical device software that uses artificial intelligence. So these are the immediate goals that are ongoing at the moment. For the long-term perspective, if you allow me, I think that we'll see the increasing autonomy of the artificial intelligence driven devices. So we'll have to deal with the ethical problems related to that, and we'll have to deal with the trust. Yeah.
Thank you. Jan, what is your next challenges in developing a medtech world with AI?
Within the next 2 months, right?
It could be 6 or 12. I mean, what are your next steps?
Yeah, maybe to share 2 very exciting areas of where we are working on at GE Healthcare is one in the field of so-called foundation models, right? I think you mentioned this as well. Big tech is working in that space very actively as well, right? Those models trained on vast amount of data. We are looking here into how those models can help us, first of all, and that's an exciting field, to speed up AI development quite dramatically, right? Because instead of starting from scratch, we can just fine-tune for different specific new use cases. And secondly, and this is even more exciting, is that foundation models will open the door to multimodal AI, right? And what do I mean by this? As a radiologist, for instance, when you read a case, you are not just reviewing images, right? You take into account patient context, right? Patient history, the latest lab results, those kind of things. Today, when a decision support AI algorithm analyzes a case and tries to detect lung nodules, they just analyze the image, right? This is very different from how a radiologist works. With foundation models, we are getting into a future where we can take into account a variety of different data modalities, data types, and take all this into consideration when getting to a prediction or anything like this. So this is very exciting. The second is this, quickly developing field of so-called agentic AI, right? AI agents. You just mentioned more automation. One of our research projects, for instance, is to look into supporting multidisciplinary team meetings or tumor boards with AI agents, right? I mean, those meetings where different specialists in the hospital sit together in the morning, discuss treatment of a patient, right? Surgeons, radiologists, oncologists, and so on. And in our current research, we try to simulate this by putting agents, right, in this network of experts. And this is a very exciting field where we will see over time for first of all, limited workflow steps and use cases, but we will see automation here and there. And this is why I think education is very important. This is why I think even specific healthcare professionals have to start rewriting their job descriptions to some extent. Yeah. Maybe not in the next 2 months, but maybe in the next 2 years.
It already started. It already started.
So maybe I stop here.
Thank you. Louis, at some point, every advances mentioned will come to you.
Yeah, I think for us, the very next steps are to revise and integrate all the work plans we have that sort of touch on AI. So there's lots of different communities and committees in the agency. And all of those have work plans, and now they're all putting AI into it, and we need to make sense of it. So that's going to be key, revision of the work plan, the main AI work plan, and also bringing in all of the work plans from the Methodology Working Party, from the CHMP, the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, and so on. So bringing that all into one global sphere and sort of understanding and making sense out of it, that is critical. The other one is looking at guidance development. What are the gaps? What are the needs? What sort of regulatory instruments we have at our disposal, and how those pan out with the AI Act is critical. The other one is obviously literacy, which is going to be fast moving. So we're looking at literacy multidimensionally. So we're looking at personas. Not everybody needs to know the same thing. If you're a developer, you need to know deep information on GDPR or EU DPR that applies to us, and other aspects on security, but maybe a user of AI that's just doing prompting something does not need that level of information, needs to know, mindful of copyright issues and so on. So we're sort of stipulating personas. And finally, we're exploring opportunities for convergence with global regulatory partners as well. I think it would be relevant to have a more sort of medicines regulatory sort of international thought process on what AI is. We're already sort of splitting a little bit in terms of terminology, for instance, where some of the terminology used in the US doesn't really map up very well to ours. So trying to look for convergence or mapping those differences are going to be elements that we're going to do in the next few months. So quite a lot of stuff to do, but we're very excited and happy to discuss in fora like these. And thank you so much.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes for a few questions. I will start with one online, and if there's one in the room, we'll be happy to answer it. Maybe first question to any of you who would like to answer: how can we ensure that AI-based medical devices, once certified, maintain or even improve their performance and value over time, especially considering their ability to learn and adapt, which I guess is a challenge for evaluation?
Well, I'll probably take that one. So Jan mentioned about continuous improvement, continuous learning of models. They're particularly tricky from a regulatory perspective because it's a lot of loss of control. So you don't really know. We've not crossed that barrier. So we're looking at developing sort of reasonable guidance to help developers in that aspect. And certainly one of the things that is critical is sort of life cycle monitoring. There's in medical device, there's the concept of pre-controlled change plans and things like that, that we can model things out of. There are standards out there that we can look at. We've not got to the point of making that sort of a strong statement on that, but it's clearly in the top of our agendas. Thanks.
Alexandre?
Yeah, one example with evolution of algorithm. EMA and AVA, they hate that, right? They just say that if they qualify something, I mean, you cannot go like every single month say, oh, I have more data, my model is performing better. But at least for the iBox qualification, they were asking us to have a sufficient performance to make them trust that they can qualify a model which is locked, and the likelihood that a new parameter to improve the performance of this model is very unlikely, or it needs a giant step, right? So I think it's very important to notice that every evolution that you want to push as an algorithm through FDA and EMA, don't go with something that you package as being changing every single month, otherwise they will not ever qualify it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I'll take that. But it doesn't come from a lack of understanding. It comes from a different perspective. But it's clear from our point of view that we also, if we just say a closed model and that's the performance you get, once the model hits the real world data, all that improvement, even from the fairness and equity perspective, if we stick it as closed, we can lose some of that performance. So we know that there's an opportunity for gains even at performance level. I think it's how you do it, that's the critical step here, and we need to sort of digest that information. So I take the point that we don't really particularly enjoy things that sort of seem to change and performance fluctuates over time, but we'll get there.
And so this ensures fascinating discussions over lunch, I guess. In this roundtable, so we've explored the transformative potential of AI in healthcare, witnessing how it's already in some specialties, revolutionizing patient management. We've also discussed the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, emphasizing the importance of responsible AI development and ethical considerations and collaboration among stakeholders, which is one key that everyone mentioned as well. As we move forward, let's continue to embrace innovation, foster dialogue, and work together to ensure that AI is used to create a more equitable, accessible, and effective healthcare system for all of us. Thank you again to all our esteemed panelists for sharing their insight and their expertise, and to the audience for your participation. I should mention that we will stop the session, of course. We go for lunch, and we'll get back at 2:30 for the next topic, Scaling AI in Healthcare from Pilot to Practice. Thank you very much.